Chapter 11, The Roaring Twenties. We will be looking at a lot of different aspects of American society. This will be the first decade that starts to resemble modern America. We will see a lot of effects from World War I, one being an improved economy, and also the advent of installment purchases, people buying things on credit. Up until the 1920s, that was considered to be a bad idea. And that changes in the 1920s. So what you see is a switch over and people buying more things, and the number of people living in cities continues to rise. Uh, During the 1920s, politics are going to be dominated by the Republican Party. They call it a return to normalcy after the changes under Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, the progressive presidents, the three progressive presidents we had in history. Warren G. Harding is going to use the words return to normalcy and lead the Republican Party back into the presidency. There are three Republican presidents during the 1920s, serving from 1921 to 1933. That is Warren Harding on the left, Calvin Coolidge in the center, and Herbert Hoover on the right. They will control Congress and the Supreme Court. In 1921, former President Taft was appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's the only man to be President and Chief Justice. And there's Chief Justice Taft. In 1920, outgoing President Wilson, as he leaves office, he's still fighting for that Treaty of Versailles and wanted a referendum, basically. If the Democrats won, he's saying his idea was that meant the American people wanted to ratify the treaty. The Republicans nominated Warren G. Harding, like we said. There's Warren. The Democrats nominated James Cox, and there's James. Harding's campaign, again, promised that return to normalcy, and Harding ends up winning the Electoral College 404 to 127, and he wins by about 7 million popular votes. For the rest of the class, when we talk about the 20th century, 7 million popular votes, 5 to 7 million popular votes, is going to be the average victory in the popular vote. And there's the 1920 Electoral College map. The Solid South still voting Democrat, but Harding carries the rest of the states. As president, Harding kind of takes the U.S. back to the way it had always been. He goes back to an isolationist foreign policy. World War I kind of a little blip on the radar there, thinking that the U.S. does not need to be involved with European affairs that much. He does, however, host the Washington Naval Conference in 1921. He asked for immigration reform, and Congress did pass that both in 1921 and again in 1924, although by 1924, President Harding had passed away. What they did was they went with the quota system. They limited immigration to 350,000 people each year, and then immigration from a country was a percentage of that 350,000 based on the percentage of people from that country already living here. So if 10% of the population was Italian, then 10% of the 350,000 could come from Italy. And there's a political cartoon of the time period. All those people from Europe wanted to come in. However, a narrow gate to get into the U.S. Chinese immigration still banned, and so was Japanese immigration. The China Exclusion Act still in effect, and that agreement President Teddy Roosevelt had reached back in the early 1900s. And there it is. There's a newspaper headline about the change in immigration policy. The Teapot Dome scandal is the biggest scandal in presidential politics until you get to Watergate about 50 years later. What happens is oil rights that belong to the U.S. Navy. We had the land belonged to the Navy. There was oil on it, and only the Navy was allowed to use those lands. Well, the rights to drill there were illegally given to two private oil companies. One of the fields was in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. The other was in Elk Hills, California. And the man who signed the papers to give them the rights to drill there was the Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall. Well, Fall was found out and convicted for accepting $300,000 in bribes and ends up going to jail. There's a political cartoon from the time period. Oil scandal. You can see the teapot dome on the roller. That is Albert Fall. He ends up in jail and loses the money as well. All right. Calvin Coolidge. All right. President Harding died on August 2nd, 1923. His vice president was Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge becomes president. His father swore him in. He was a justice of the peace. Coolidge happened to be visiting his family when Harding died. I believe he was in Vermont. Not positive about that, though. He finishes Harding's term. He cleans up the Teapot Dome scandal and actually does a very good job and has a favorable reputation with the voters. So when it comes to 1924, the Republicans nominate Coolidge for his own term. The Democrats nominated John W. Davis. That's Mr. Davis. The Progressives nominated Robert M. La Follette, a very popular governor from Wisconsin. Coolidge wins the Electoral College 382 to 136, and La Follette does get 13. He wins the popular vote by about 7 million over Davis and 11 million over La Follette. And there's the Electoral College. La Follette carries his home state of Wisconsin. The Solid South votes for Davis, and the rest of the country goes to Coolidge. As president, he was a very laissez-faire type of person, where Harding was very outgoing. Coolidge was very quiet. His famous quote is, "The business of the American people is business." Not real exciting. Right? He believed in a small government, and when it came to a veto or to a bonus that had been passed by Congress for World War I veterans, he vetoed it. Congress overrode the veto. And remember, he's a Republican, and Congress was controlled by Republicans, so they overrode their own president. In 1928, Coolidge decided he was done. He had enough as the president and decided not to run again.